listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you, and welcome to this special afternoon edition of The Briefing. We're joined this afternoon by federal opposition leader Sussan Ley. Faced with one of the toughest jobs in the country at the moment, Ms Ley has been out and about today selling the coalition's new energy policy. But how can a leader lead or unite a party when they're being knifed by their own colleagues? We sit down for a very candid discussion where we ask Sussan about why the coalition is self-imploding, whether the hard right of the party will push her off the so-called glass cliff, and her late mother's timely advice. Sussan Ley, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a real pleasure.
Massive day out selling your energy policy. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. Australians deserve affordable energy, and we do need to play our part responsibly in reducing emissions. We know we can do both, but right now we need to prioritise affordable energy because what's happening is not good, not for the next generations, not for manufacturing, not for small business, not for families, not for mums going into Christmas who are working out how they can make the family budget stretch with the presents, with the travel, with turning the cooler on. Because energy is in everything, and the cost of energy affects the cost of everything. And when energy is unaffordable, everything is unaffordable.
Talking about energy, one may argue there is a fair bit of negative energy within the coalition at the moment. I'd say you'd have one of the toughest jobs in the country right now. We know about the devastating result from the federal election, trying to unite a broken party. Under your leadership, what does the coalition stand for?
The Liberal Party stands for freedom, choice, aspiration, enterprise, reward for effort. We back people who work hard, take risks, have a go, have a crack, get up early and give back to their community, people who built this country. And I'm a migrant to Australia, incredibly grateful that this country has given me a life, my 3 beautiful children and 6 grandchildren, a wonderful, wonderful life in rural Western New South Wales, where the values of my journey through my own experiences in Australia are the values of the Liberal Party. And that's why I feel so honoured to lead this party that I've belonged to for more than half my adult life. And Tash, it's why the defining moment for me was when I hooked up the caravan that I lived in when I was a shearer's cook in Western Queensland. I painted it in Liberal Party colours. By then, having gone to university age 30 and struggled through the highs and lows of the farm, the kids, the study, I put those Liberal Party logos on my van and I towed it up and down the Murray River. And I just listened to people.
How hard, though, is it to lead the Liberal Party right now? There is a lot of speculation, I'm going to be brutally honest here, that you're being knifed in your own back from within your own party. We know this happened with the Labor government. How does that feel? How can you possibly unite a divided party or put a fight up to the current government when you're being knifed by your own colleagues?
That's not something I would agree with. But yes, there are a range of different opinions. And if you look back to the loss we had, the greatest loss we've ever had in the 81 years of our party in May this year, there was always going to be some degree of fallout from that in terms of people having their say and having a very constructive debate about what we stand for, who we are, where we belong. And I said at the time I became leader that our policies are up for review. And I made that very clear because to come out of a defeat like that and then wake up the next day and say, okay, I've got it all worked out. Here it is. Here's my policy on this, this and this. That was never going to be my approach to leadership or to leadership at this critical juncture of time. It was always going to be, right, I'm going to enfranchise every single member of my party room to have their say. Sometimes they've done that publicly, sometimes they've done it privately, but I believe they have said what they've said with that strong belief in a better Australia, the national interest, and how we apply the values that we all agree on as Liberals to the policy challenges in front of this country. And it all came to fruition with the policy that we agreed on as Liberals and Nationals, the two parties came together, affordable, responsible energy. And that's something everyone signed on for. So I'm looking forward to talking about it. And people do make the observation, they're quite right, that when they see a political party talking about themselves, they tend to mark them down. Well, the time has come to talk publicly and passionately about what we want to see for Australian people.
I love that you've mentioned, Susan, values, because I think a lot of Australians feel that is missing in some politicians and some parties right now. It's about ego. It's about self-interest. It isn't about the average person right now who is really struggling on so many different fronts. You were pro net zero, correct, previously?
When we signed on to net zero, I was part of the Morrison cabinet that did that. And we accepted at the time that that was a demonstration of our commitment to the global challenge of climate change. We still have that commitment. I still have that commitment. Time has moved on, and the results of policy then, not just in Australia but across the world, are clear for all to see. But most importantly, what we're not seeing in Australia is either power prices coming down, which the Prime Minister promised in 2 elections in succession, or emissions. Emissions are flatlining. So $75 billion spent to where we are now. The BCA estimates that $530 billion to get to the 2035 target that Labor has talked about. Meanwhile, $150 billion, I think, is the figure of business going offshore, because if we close down manufacturing, business and industries in this country, that's actually what's happening under Labor's energy policy. If we do that and we send those businesses offshore, the businesses are still emitting, producing emissions, which probably are more than they would do in Australia, in countries that don't have the same environmental laws that we do. And that's not helping the planet. So our plan is unashamedly about affordable energy for households and businesses. Because if we don't have that, we don't have an economy.
In regards going back to the value system, what I think again is missing, and many people say this, is you passionately believe in something. We've both got children, you have grandchildren. We want to build this world and keep this world for future generations. That if you so passionately were supportive of net zero, why the turnaround? Do votes matter more than values?
Not at all. And if I can express those views then through the same lens as now, it is the same caring for the planet, caring for future generations, caring about the response that we have to climate action, and our commitment to the Paris Agreement, sustained, underscores that. Now, the notional signing on to a target 25 years hence, 30 years from that date, what does that mean in practice? Well, now we can see what it means. And unfortunately, it doesn't mean enough, because had we known then what Labor's policy would be now, and in fact, what was happening to our energy grid as a result of Labor's policy, then, well, clearly we're responding to what we see in front of us. And it's important to say that, net zero means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Some people I've spoken to want to know if I'm committed to renewables. Yes, I am. Absolutely.
But you're committed to coal-fired power stations as well. One may argue that is not about looking at the future for our country. That's about going to the past.
We're transitioning away from coal, and the whole world is. But meanwhile, we're not getting there at the speed that Labor has told us we will. 60%, I think, of the electricity is generated by coal here in the state of New South Wales, in fact, probably down the whole eastern seaboard. So while the figure might be declining, it's still very high. That's because you can't just have renewables in the system. You have to have baseload power, and you have to have dispatchable power in the form of pumped hydro, battery storage, gas turbine generation, so that when renewables aren't operating, you've got that dispatchable power to jump in and keep the grid going. So families don't pay for a renewable energy system, they pay for the whole energy system. That includes renewables, it includes gas, and yes, we have to keep coal in the system as long as we need to, as that transition takes place, because you can't take it away. There was one example where a country, two countries, Spain and Portugal, ran the whole grid, or almost all the grid, on too much renewables, and the Iberian Peninsula went into a blackout and 11 people lost their lives. Effectively, the lights went out. And while there were a lot of excuses made afterwards, the accepted reason is that the renewables were trying to do it all. And when one went slightly out of sync with the synchronicity of the grid, the whole system collapsed. It's a fascinating case study, and it demonstrates the point that renewables have their role to play, but you have to balance it. You have to balance the grid. And we need to do that in a responsible way that keeps power prices affordable.
You're talking about power prices there. We saw promises from the federal government, Mr Albanese, saying that he would bring power prices down. That hasn't happened.
They've gone up 40%.
You're making the same promise. You are going to bring those prices down, that they'll be more affordable under the Liberal Party, under the coalition. But how are you going to do that?
You put downward pressure on prices when you add supply to the system. So we have to increase the capacity of the system. We have to have more electricity generated. We have to invest in capacity. Now, Labor is saying the only way to do that is to invest in renewables and battery storage. But as I said before, you need the baseload power. You need a transition to a higher level of renewables if that's where you're heading, and gas is critical. So I see stepping on the gas as a critical and important intervention that this country should be making to start to put downward pressure on power prices. Now, we're in Australia standing on probably the second or third largest reserves of LNG in the world in our land and around our coast. We're exporting LNG to Japan, so 40% of their LNG needs come from Australia. We're exporting to other countries because it's helping them decarbonise. They move away from other forms of energy that are more emissions intensive to LNG, which is less, and it's very high quality, Australia's LNG. It's landlocked in New South Wales and Victoria. But meanwhile, we are building a LNG import terminal in Port Kembla to import natural gas from the Middle East. Imagine the carbon footprint of compressing gas from so far away to liquid form, putting it in a ship and sending it all the way here to be unpacked at the import terminal. That tells you how crazy this government's energy policy really is.
So how do you turn that around and quickly? Because right now, it's great to say we're planning for the future, but right now, how do those bills come down? How do you turn that around?
You say we have to unlock the stores of gas in Australia. Yes, we can, because they're here. And government policy needs to be firm and serious and get on with it. But instead, we've got an approach to the environmental approvals that would see new gas coming online that are taking years and years to actually get through. When I was Environment Minister, I was involved in approvals for Narrabri, which is a gas project in Western New South Wales, and it's still barely online. So what we see is a government that just doesn't do the necessary actions to bring gas into the system. And there's often a lot of discussion about who gets the gas, but I say there's plenty of gas. We just need to unlock it and pump it into the system and recognise that it is critical for our energy future as we make the transition.
Also want to ask you a question going back to the leadership right now, because that is front and centre and there has been ongoing speculation again today for you. When you went into that meeting and there was a bunch of the Conservative part of the party walking together in almost an army into that meeting, how did that make you feel?
Look, people walk down a corridor and
it was a pretty clear message for you, Susan.
I didn't look at it as anything other than a group of people who'd probably met in somebody's office to have a chat and perhaps meet regularly, as groups of our party members and senators do from time to time. And of course, walked into the room where we were all going to have our say on energy policy. And, I always find it a bit whimsical when the people who watch us from the outside say, well, that was funny. And Susan was walking by herself. I just got up from my desk, picked up my papers and said, right, guys, I'm just heading to the party room to get on with this energy meeting.
So that wasn't strategic?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. I bumped into Richard Colbeck walking in. And then when the party room finished, I picked up a few coffee cups and chatted to someone in the room and then wandered out and, speculation followed. It honestly, there isn't anything to see there. What is more important is what we said and how we came together in that discussion and how we all did have our say, and everyone didn't have the same views, nor should they in our party. We value free speech. And the next step was we formed a dedicated Liberal Party position the following day. And then yesterday we signed off with the National Party, and that's the joint position that's represented here in this plan. And I'm really proud of it because it is about Australian families. It is about mums and dads who are hurting. And it is about the next generation not having to have a debt that they can't pay back easily. I want the next generation to inherit opportunities, not debt. But right now, they're set up to inherit a lower standard of living than we are. That's not good enough. It really isn't.
One of the key lessons from the last federal election, talking about future generations, and you're a trailblazer in the fact that you're the first female leader with the opposition. There is a phrase that's coined the glass cliff, that certain corporations give the role to a female. It breaks many of our hearts because we can see it happening not just in government and politics, but in corporations across the country. And that's a disservice not only to fantastically talented women, but a disservice to the millions of Australian female voters out there that one may argue the Liberal Party has lost at the moment. Do you feel like you're going to get pushed off a glass cliff?
Oh, I wasn't given the job. I went into a contested ballot for the job and I was the successful person in that ballot. So it wasn't as if somebody was handing me something that no one else wanted. The other thing to note is that I recognise that being the first female leader of an opposition, there is a signal that sends. That's not all that it's about. It's about the job you do and the responsibility you take and how you approach the particular style of leadership that we all do have. And mine has always been consultative. It's always been about listening. And I've had the great privilege, by the way, you talk about women in corporate leadership positions and in the media like yourself. And I love the conversations we have. And sure, there are some things that we reflect on about our individual journeys. And I look back at my journey when I wanted to fly airplanes desperately and everyone said, you're a girl, you can't possibly. You wear glasses, you're uncoordinated. And, I pushed ahead and I worked 3 jobs just to get my pilot's license. And then a whole lot of boys said, we don't want you flying in one of our corporate jets. And I persisted and got a slightly different type of flying job. Then I worked in the shearing sheds of Western Queensland and they said, you can't pick up fleeces this many on the board of 8 shearers. And I did. And when I left the job, they replaced me with 2 boys. So I did a pretty good job on those in that shearing shed. And I've had some tough times in my life. And I know I speak to a lot of women who've experienced similar tough times. I really still value the role I have as the Liberal Party leader because I get to talk about what I want to see for the next generation and the one after that.
I read an article recently where you said your passion for following politics is that so many politicians in Canberra did not understand what it was like growing up in regional or rural Australia. What would your message be? Because a lot of people today are completely disillusioned with what's going on in Canberra. They're out of touch. How do you have that cut through and how are you going to make a real difference? Because right now, as I said before, I think you've got one of the toughest jobs in the country.
People do look at Canberra. Of course, if you grew up in Canberra, you sometimes feel it's not just so much about the city, which I do still love, and it can seem a bit of a black box. What I would encourage everyone to do is make contact with their local member of parliament, come to Canberra and try to experience what we all do. Now, I know everyone can't do that and it sounds very simple, but people do go to Canberra as representatives of their communities because they do want to make Australia a better place. They do believe in the contest of ideas. They do work hard and they do have their own views, yes, which don't always agree with each other. So part of what I always want to explain is to restore some confidence in the body politic. But I also know that younger people don't tune into what we're up to. And sometimes, I understand that completely. They listen differently. They might listen to your podcast, but they don't listen to the regular news. They don't read the newspapers and they consume information differently. And I think the challenge for us is to make sure that we reach those different audiences, understand where they're coming from and totally appreciate that their life experiences are not the same as mine was at that age. So that listening that I did in my caravan up and down the Murray to those regional communities that I care so very, very deeply about, I feel that I do that same listening today, but it's a great privilege to be able to do it.
What do you want your legacy to be?
That the generations that my children and grandchildren represent inherit an Australia that is safer, more prosperous, more secure than the one we are in, and that they have a better standard of living than they are set right now to have. And central to that is energy policy, which is why I'm spending so much time talking about this plan. Now, that might not be a grand type of statement, but for me, it captures it all. It captures the journey I've had, my migrant journey, the hard work. 4 of my grandchildren will be the 6th generation on the family farm. And there was a time when we nearly lost that farm because the debt was too high, commodity prices were too low. And, we worked. I went to uni, I studied, I got extra income and just made a go of it somehow. That passion for the country that I came to, but it extends to that next generation. And I can't bear the thought of looking at my grandchildren and thinking that some of their experiences may be failing to be able to save to buy a home, or living in a country that's less secure, or having uncertainty about what might happen next and what their job prospects will be. And it does focus the mind when you look so closely at that next generation.
Last 2 questions for you, Susan. What's been your greatest challenge?
In my life?
Mm-hmm.
I think flying aeroplanes was a huge challenge for me because it taught me so much. It taught me not to have an ego. So when you fly an aeroplane, you need discipline, you need focus, and you need to totally respond to something that is, yes, in your control, but not entirely. And the craft of flight is the thing that inspires me every day as far as when I'm not doing my vocation of politics. But for me, the challenge of understanding flying and what it means was a big challenge. I mean, there's been lots of challenges along the way, both personal and professional. But I love the way that aviation has had a narrative that started when I was just a very small child. And I would get on a plane to fly from boarding school in England back to the Middle East where my parents lived. And that journey on my own, age 10, it was a pretty big deal. It taught me self-reliance, and self-reliance counts.
And recently, talking about personal challenges, you lost your beautiful mum. What would your mum think today?
Well, she would be watching the news and she would be in between sort of laughing and picking up the phone and giving me advice.
What would she say to you?
One of her great pieces of advice was, it's none of your business what other people think of you. And when I was growing up, when you're a teenager full of teenage angst, you've got to look right, sound right, be part of the group. I would never understand why she would say, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. She taught me that ego doesn't matter. And as I said, what other people think of you really doesn't count, which sometimes it's good to remind myself of that.
Especially in Canberra.
Well, especially perhaps in the world of politics. Canberra itself is still a beautiful place.
It is indeed. Susan, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure.
That was Leader of the Federal Opposition, Sussan Ley. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram @The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.